Dr. Mix.
Dr. Mix. Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Mix podcasts. This week, we will talk about how to mix the kick drum. Yes, this is a highly debated topic, and to be honest with you, we'd never really finished to say everything that we needed to say about the bass, so it is very possible that we will talk about bass again. But in the meantime, let me introduce you to my lovely co-hosts, Aaron on my right.
Hi, I'm Aaron. I'm the junior sound engineer here at Dr. Mix.
And Dom in front of me.
Hi, I'm Dom. I'm the senior music producer here.
Good enough.
Do we always have to say?
Apparently.
I don't know.
Okay, edit.
Dom, how was your week?
It was great. It was a long week, no weekend, but it was good. I was at PMT Birmingham, so I did a presentation for the new reface keyboards for Yamaha. So I was there for the whole week, and it was great.
All right. As you may know, Dom is a product specialist for Yamaha keyboards, and he's an endorsed artist, and he goes around the country and abroad to demonstrate those keyboards during the weekends. Because during the week, he's here doing the hard thing with Dr. Mix. Yes. And how was your week, Aaron?
Oh, my week was pretty good. Just usual mixes and mastering and stuff.
Okay, so shall we dive into it?
Yeah, let's go for it.
How to mix the kick drum. Well, of course, we have already debated quite a few subjects around how to mix the kick drum. So I would say that let's do a little recap of what's needed. And then I would go, if you agree, Dom, I would go for tricks, one after the other. How's that?
Okay.
Have we got enough time?
Yeah, no, you're right. We don't have usually too much time because, we should get more time. Anyway, so kick drum, it is regarded as one of the most important parts of every track, especially for certain genres, as dance music, rap, hip-hop, rock music, pretty important too. It's, a little bit of the foundation, what drives the rhythm from the bottom end. So, of course, it's one of the hard things to get right because it takes so much space in the mix because of all of the energy that it carries. So the low end is, of course, very important. You need to make space for it. I would ask Aaron quickly, how do you prepare for the kick drum to be placed in the mix?
Well, obviously, you need to make sure that the low end from everything else has already been filtered out so that there's space for the kick. Obviously, the exception to this is the bass, which can sometimes be filtered a little bit, but generally it needs to have the low end as well. But plan that the kick and the bass will sit nicely, and to make sure that one will sit beneath the other, you have to make that decision.
That's right. And also, Dom, how would you break down the components of a kick drum sound? What is there, in terms of frequencies, in terms of transients and stuff? How would you break down how the kick evolves through its duration, or how would you define its components?
Yeah, so basically it's a very complex sound. It might seem very simple, but you have the attack first of all, which is like the top end or mid-range of the kick drum, the upper mid-range. So that's the very initial transient. If you zoom very closely into a kick drum waveform, you will see that at first you have these very short transients, and then you go to the mid, which is the low end, of course. So I would say, we have the top end, which is the attack. We also have, kind of around 100 hertz, 120, which is like the thump when it actually kicks you.
Yeah.
And of course, around 60, sometimes 65, depends on the kick drum, is the body of the kick drum, the low end, that gives you the perception of the actual low end.
That's right. I would also say that the initial part, the knock, the initial transient doesn't last so long. So if you want to hear the perception of the low end of the bass, you have to wait for a few milliseconds before it hits you, which means how long this kick drum is. Kick drum can be 100 millisecond, 200 millisecond, 300 milliseconds. Sometimes it can be boom. It could even be 1 second. So the low end is what comes after, and because it's a slower frequency, it takes a little bit longer to make his presence felt, if that makes sense. So if I take a kick drum that has a very big bottom and then I shorten it, then that big bottom will go with it. Even if it's there, it will go because it doesn't have time to fully develop through the length of the kick drum. So part of the low end is also dependent on how long it is. So one of the tricks may be if the bass drum has too much low end, you can reduce the low end by reducing the length of the bass drum itself, maybe with a gate, maybe just shortening the waveform. So that's one aspect of it. And then, of course, as you said, there is the mid, which is what happens in the mid-range. So what are your tricks to increase or improve every one of these components?
Well, I hope we don't mention it too much, but we know, we tend to use the air EQ, and actually the preset that it has for the kick drum, it says kick drum, it has the exact, frequencies that most of the times they work like a charm. But that's just the beginning. I mean, it could be a Pultec EQ, it could be anything. But I would say, depending on the actual track and how the other instruments work, it could be multi-band, envelope shapers.
Right.
Or it could be, like a compressor, of course parallel. But I would say it's a complex process. Sometimes it would be a parallel for the low end. Sometimes we might duplicate the track so we get more elements. A parallel just for the attack. So we filter it out completely and we add some distortion, just a bit of saturation so you accentuate the attack. So we bring this up without bringing more low end up. So we have more attack without compromising the level of the mix.
Yes, and I want to expand a little bit on what you said about transient designers and multi-band transient designer. What that refers to is generally a plugin that reshapes the attack, sustain, decay, and release of the sound divided in each component. So I might decide to have a higher attack, but just on the middle frequencies, because maybe you just need a little bit of knock and that will help you bring it out. Or it could make the low end a bit longer. Cubase is a fantastic one, which is called multiband envelope shaper.
Yeah, that's the one.
And that works like a charm. So it's like you have your hands inside of the sound. You can actually sculpt it from within. So that's a very cool trick and it's very modern.
Watch our videos about it.
Oh, actually, yes, we do have a video about it. In fact, we have a lot of videos about it, which I strongly recommend to watch. Just go on YouTube/Dr. Mix TV. We've got about 50 videos and they're going quite well. So as I was saying, if you think of the bass drum being three different components, the top end, the meat in the middle, and the low end, what you can do is you can divide the sound into three parallel channels. So you will take just the low end on one channel, you will take the mids in another, or maybe it could be, 200 to 300 on a second channel. On a third channel, you put everything that's above it. So you can compress it individually, you can treat it individually, and then add the three channels back into the mix. So that technically it's like you're playing a synthesizer next to your kick drum. You can do as many parallel compressions and parallel channels you want with the bass drum. And you can also ride them as the song progresses. So maybe you might need a little bit more attack in the chorus because it becomes a bit busier. So you need the bass drum to come through a little bit more. So you can just push the mids as a parallel channel and that will work like a charm. And let's move on quickly to another trick. This is something that I call the knock-knock trick. Aaron, do you know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about.
Cool. Will you please explain that trick?
I will. With this trick, what you do is you take a auxiliary from the kick, pre-fader, so that it's not affected by the main level, and you compress it very heavily and you don't give it enough time to recover. And then after that compressor, you take a couple of filters. So you take away the low end and you take away the top end, and then you create a boost where you get the knock of the kick drum. And this allows you gives you a very focused, punchy sound that you can then blend in with your main kick drum, and it will help it cut through.
This is $1 million trick. It works like a charm. Let me give you a little bit of numbers here. Firstly, you can use any compressor. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be just whatever stock compressor you got in your DAW. It's fine. You can use that. I would say about 30 milliseconds attack, and then, make it compress a lot. It could be, 10 dBs, 20 dBs. Don't really give it time to recover. You can have a long release time, like 1 second. It's kind of irrelevant, because when you use those settings, you squash the sound. Almost you can't recognize it anymore, and it becomes like a knock. That's exactly what it becomes, and it loses all the low end.
Yeah, it just becomes sort of a solid mass, really.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have to make up for the gain that you reduce. So on the compressor itself, you touch the makeup gain, and you turn it back up. So already you have an extremely compressed version, which is like someone knocking on the door, really. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And then you enhance it even more, and you can cut the low end up until, I don't know, even, 400, 500, 600, 800,
500
500.
works. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you will have your peak, your boosts that can hit anywhere between 2Ks and 5Ks.
Sometimes towards 1K even. It's very kick dependent.
Yeah, it's very kick dependent. I personally like to have like a higher register for it, because it's even easier to make it cut through the music. But it's of course it depends on the type of sound that you have, the type of bass drum. And then after that peak, you completely shave off anything that comes after it. So you just get rid of whatever frequency comes next. It's a very, very clever way of doing it, and it gives amazing results. Don't you agree, Dom?
Oh, yeah, of course. Use it all the time.
And now why don't you give us, Dom, the other face of this trick, which is the low end. Give us the Pultec trick, please.
Yeah, again, the same philosophy. You just compress your kick drum in a parallel channel quite a lot, so that you basically are left with just the attack. You lose the low end again, but then you compensate by adding like a Pultec style EQ. It could be anything from a real one to a plugin, and then you boost the low end all the way up, of course making sure that it doesn't distort. And basically what it does is it creates like a very strong and solid low end, but it's so short because you've done your compressor before that it's really like an enhancer of the low end of your kick drum. So yeah, I mean, there are many ways you can, there are many variations for this trick. You can add a saturator after the Pultec, or sometimes I tend to get even a more pronounced effect. I tend to add like a transient designer after the compressor, so I can get even more attack. Or sometimes one trick I've developed is I go before the compressor, add transient designer, so I remove all the release of the kick drum, and I accentuate the attack. So basically I'm left with a very short kick drum. I don't want the compressor to enhance the actual length of the kick drum. So basically it's a very short kick drum. I compress it even more, and then add another transient enhancer after the compressor, so it's even more pronounced, and then I add the Pultec, and then it's like it hits you in the face. It's really, really powerful.
All right, let me give just a couple of words of advice. Be careful when you use transient designers, because when you use transient designers in parallel, a lot of them mess up with your phase.
If they're multi-band, but if they're single band, in general, they're kind of alright.
Yeah, the Cubase one is very good with not messing with your phase. The Cubase stock one.
Yeah. That's what.
Very, very good.
Yeah.
But the single band. Version of it. Yeah.
So you've got to be always very careful. In general, when you do parallel tricks, you got to make sure that the phase is always coherent. Make sure that everything is set up correctly in your DAW so that you don't get trouble. I will expand a little bit more on the Pultec trick, compression, and then you enhance the low end with a Pultec style trick. We say Pultec, it can be anything, but something that is very generous and that has a very pretty sound Some EQs are for correction, some EQs are for enhancement. If you take the fat bastard and you pull up the low end, that is really, really nice. But if you use like a standard plugin just for enhancement, you might not get the same type of sound. So you need an EQ that has a sound. So once you have done that, you basically have a bassier and shorter version of the kick drum that you can sneak in. And there are several things that you can do also. You can filter out the top end, or you can filter out the low end and invent it again with an EQ. And at any stage, either before compression or after compression. So you can just use low-pass filters, high-pass filters. You can experiment with it so that, especially if you put it before the compressor, then you can influence the way the compressor is going to react. Because as you know from previous episodes, compressors like to react to mid frequencies. They don't react too well to low end because they don't know what to do with all of that signal. So sometimes filtering out the low end a little bit helps the compressor behave a bit more predictably. So then you can squash the hell out of it and then add some bass again with the Pultec style EQ. Another trick that you can do is you can just filter out after the fact. So you let the compressor do whatever it wants to do, and then you just filter out whatever you don't need, and maybe you're left just with the low end, and instead of using a Pultec, you can use a saturator to enhance the content of the low end in that parallel channel. Another thing that you might want to keep an eye on, this stuff tends to work well with mono. So if you keep your low end nice in the center, it will help your mix sound more compact. Do you agree, Aaron?
Yeah, because obviously mono, there's no difference between left and right. It's all the same, stays the same, stays compact. It's great.
All right. I feel like we have more tricks. In fact, I have a ton of tricks. I have to decide which one to talk about. We have already explained the trigger. We will just touch shortly on it. Dom, can you just tell us about triggering and drum layering?
Yeah, triggering is a very, usual technique. You basically use either a plugin or you're using transients to create MIDI notes, and then you layer a sample on top of your existing kick drum, depending on where it's lacking. So if it's it doesn't have low end, you just try and find a sample that has low end, or you can add a sine wave. Coming up, or you can add like a top end sample that has a bit more attack. So this you can do with Slate Trigger, you can do it with Dramagog, and there are quite a few other plugins that do that.
Yeah, we talk about it more extensively on podcast number 3, I guess.
I think it was number 2.
Was it 2? Yeah.
Number 2, thank you. The one about drums. So let's speak about the 808, because the 808 is one of the most important and famous kick drum sounds on the planet. It's been there for about 40 years and it's not going anywhere. It sounds amazing. We always love it. And it comes with a lot of consequences. Of course, it's a drum machine from Roland from back in the day, and it was completely shapeable. Every sound on the 808, you could shape it, how long it was, the pitch. You had various different controls. So what that means nowadays is that there are a ton of 808 kick drum sounds around, and not all of them are great. So the first trick that I suggest for 808 is, if the sound of the 808 doesn't work, change the sample of the 808, because it's such an iconic sound and it sounds so good that theoretically you shouldn't need to touch it at all. Instead, you can build the rest of the mix around it. It's such a good sound. Why would you want to touch it? If you need to touch it, usually it's because it's a bad sample. So you might as well replace it. Having said that, the 808 has such a nice and pretty long low end that sometimes is used as a bass in its own right. So that happens a lot in modern times, especially with hip hop, where there is basically no bass line because the kick drum covers that ground for the bass. Can you expand on it, Dom?
Well, I have no idea what you're talking about, Claudio, but yeah, of course. No, I totally agree. 808 is like a huge problem solver sometimes. Yeah, I mean, if it's long, then you have to treat it like a bass, basically. So, because it's gonna be, you can't treat it the way you treat kick drum. If you compress it, it will start reacting a bit weird. So, the release, the tail is going to be quite erratic. You don't want that. You might have distortion. Also, you have to be very careful because there's so much low end that even the slightest saturation can really alter the sound. So I would be very gentle with it, just try and gentle EQ and not much else. I like you said, I don't think you should really be very drastic with the 808 sound. If it's a good sample, then it should find its place in the mix. And I totally agree with you when you say replace the sample if it's not good. I think that's a very good practice. If your kick drum doesn't work, then change it.
Yes. In fact, I think I said this before. When you're producing music, even producing should be a mixing gesture. So if you're looking for that nice, fat, low end, just choose the right sound so that you don't have to invent it during the mix. One of the famous phrases that we hear a lot, I'll just fix it in the mix. It doesn't work like that. I mean, it can work like that, but it's always a compromise. If you can start with the correct sound from the beginning, then mixing becomes just easy. It's not problem solving, it becomes an artistic gesture. And before we go to Q&A, I just want to say one last thing about mixing. Mixing is a performance, and it's as important as playing the instruments. Some people think that the artistic moment is finished when you finish recording. That's not it. Mixing a song is a gesture. So if that action is inspired, then you will come up with an interesting mix. That's why we tend to like analog gear a lot, because you can touch analog gear. It behaves like a synthesizer. I have a human interaction with it. Some people say that nowadays plugins are just as good, and that may be true, but what's different is how you feel about that, because a plugin is behind a screen, it's behind a glass. You can't really touch it. You don't really relate to it. With a piece of machinery, you relate with that, and every piece of machinery sounds slightly different, and it adds to that chaos theory of mixing where magic could happen. So that's one of the reasons why we like analog gear.
Yeah, and I also think we owe something before we go to the Q&A about the sine wave trick.
Oh, yes.
We shouldn't forget that, right?
Okay.
So, Aaron?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can talk about it. Obviously, a sine wave is a very consistent tone. So if you have sort of a 60 hertz sine wave, you can layer that underneath your kick and you'll have a very solid, consistent low end.
Exactly. So the technique is the following. You have a send out of your kick drum to a gate. So basically, when the kick drum is playing, you want a gate to open on a parallel channel. Now that gate will open up a sine wave signal generator. Every DAW has one. Choose a nice signal generator, select the sine wave, use a note that's coherent with the harmony of the track. So there are many key to frequency converters. It's going to be always something below 120. So you select that right note, and every time the kick hits, you have the gate opening for the sine wave, which will reinforce your kick drum sound. Dom?
Yeah, and then you can play with the attack and the release of the gate, so you can shape the low end of your kick drum, so you can be from very short to very long. So don't be afraid to experiment with the settings of your gate, and it can be any gate, like even the stock plugins of your DAW will work.
Yeah, that's a very important thing, because it's very important to understand the technique rather than the plugin or piece of gear before we then decide what to use. Because plugins, gear, they are tools. And of course, if you want to use advanced tools, you need to first understand exactly the technique in the first place. So, oh man, I'm coming up with more tricks.
Go for it.
I don't think it's going to stop.
Okay, I will talk about sidechain compression just quickly. Sidechain is where you use the kick drum to duct the bass. So every time the kick drum is playing, the bass goes down so that I make space for the kick drum. Now, what's interesting is that this action will affect more the sound of the kick drum than it will affect the sound of the bass. Of course, it affects the sound of the bass, but the relationship that there is between the bass and the kick drum is going to be more significantly changing the sound of the kick drum. If you're doing sidechain compression with that in mind, you'll know what I'm talking about. And I think we've been speaking too much now, so we gotta go to Q&A, because it's Q&A time, isn't it? Q&A time. All right, Aaron, what have we got this week?
Okay, our first question comes from Jacek Sabrinsky, who asks, what is, and is there any, sound and quality difference between DAWs? Is it true that Pro Tools sounds better than Cubase?
No, that's a good question.
Is it true that Pro Tools
Seriously.
11 sounds better than Pro Tools 10? Has anyone ever checked it out by making some comparisons? And he also wants to say, best to all you guys, keep on, and greetings from Warsaw.
Go ahead, Dom.
Okay, no, that's something that everybody wonders. I myself have been doing blind tests. I've been doing, phase reverse tricks to see if they null and everything. It's a very valid question. Well, if I had to give a scientific answer, it would be no. There's no difference because basically, it's just digital summing. It's just ones and zeros. I know I'm going to be crucified for saying this, but I don't think there's any difference. You have to make sure that your pan low is the same. If your pan low is the same and you bounce something, it will null. Even if it doesn't, something else is making it not null. But anyway, the difference will be so minimal that it doesn't really matter anyway. But what I want to say is that I think the DAW does affect your sound a lot, but not because of the DAW itself, but of the ergonomics of the DAW. So when we're mixing in Pro Tools, we tend, because it doesn't have a console, we tend to use third-party filters, third-party EQs. We do our gain staging in a different way. When we're using Cubase, then we have the pre-gain already there, we have the EQ there, we have, quite a few plugins. So basically we can get to the sound, that's my personal preference, but I can get to the sound faster. So, in my way of working, I feel that it gets me to the sound that I want faster, and I like the sound of it. So yes, I mix differently in Pro Tools, I mix differently in Cubase, and I think that, it's very important that you're really comfortable with your DAW, and the DAW that you're more comfortable with, that's going to give you the best sound.
With regards to technical differences, I am sure that the algorithms that are there in order for the different channels to be summed to the bus will have their effects. I mean, I'm sure that the DAWs that we had 10 years ago are nowhere near what we have now. So just to mention, there was at some point a turning point with the DAWs when they went, I think, was it 48-bit on the master bus?
Yeah.
Aaron?
Yep.
Yeah. So when you do that, it has an effect on your ceiling and how hot you can go into it. I mean, it's a bit complicated, so we won't go into the technical details of it. But yes, there have been improvements in DAWs. Now, is that significant enough? I don't think so. Why? Because you can make a great piece of art with a 4-track cassette recorder if you have a very interesting idea, or you can get horrible music in the best recording studio on the planet. So it's, and we're talking about, we are gearheads. Here we are gearheads, complete total gearheads. So we do the blind testing, A, B, we talk about it at night.
I actually wrote my dissertation on analog and digital summing. So I've done a lot of research into this.
What were the results?
There's no difference between DAWs. It's the same thing as if you play back an audio file through iTunes or through Winamp or whatever player. It's a host for the audio, and it's how you use it that affects the sound.
Wow.
There you go.
There you go. But, this is the beauty of music. It's debatable. What you make out of music is an expression of yourself. And if a DAW allows you to be a better yourself version, then you should use that. Next question.
Second question comes from Frank, who asks, how do you get a trigger-like sound from a normal acoustic kick drum? Like on metal and rock bands, they often use a computer or a trigger device connected to their kick drum. But how do you get that sound with a normal drum?
Well, that's easy. That's Slate Digital trigger. That's it. Especially for rock, the trick is Slate Digital. Everyone knows it.
Yeah, it's very pervasive. Okay, next question. Our third question comes from Matt Perkins, who asks, who are your top 5 producers of all time and what can we learn from their vision? I think if we do 2 each, that works out as 6 and we're giving a bonus.
All right. Dom, you go.
Oh, Aaron, you go.
I did warn you this was coming up. I did give you some preparation. I've thought long and hard, and there's a lot of people that I like right now. There's a lot of people who sort of are just starting out, and they haven't quite built the reputation to be my favorite, such as Bo Burchell. But my 2 favorites are Forrester Saval, who is currently leading sort of the new rock metal wave that's coming out of Australia at the moment. Bands such as Carnival and Dead Letter Circus. And he has sort of a very strong influence on that sound. You can really tell the effects and the use, and the drums especially are very strong with him. And my second is perhaps better known. It's David Bendeth, who is responsible for that amazing drum sound on the Paramore Riot album.
Oh, yeah.
And also on the Bring Me the Horizon record, Sempiternal. I think his drum sound is phenomenal.
Yeah. Wow. All right. I'm going to go to another side of the spectrum, and I'm going to say Trevor Horn.
Ooh.
Because of Relax, because of The Art of Noise, because of The Tattoo, because he's a genius. And I have to say it's Quincy Jones. I stole it from you. Sorry.
I can't believe you did that.
Sorry.
Dom's face again. Second time this episode.
Sorry, Dom. It is. Quincy Jones is my favorite producer of all time. Because he knows orchestration, he cares for music. He has done from films to Michael Jackson to some of the most beautiful disco tracks in the 70s. He's an all-rounder, amazing musician, beautiful human being, and I'm a big fan of him. Dom, it's your turn now.
Well, since you stole Quincy Jones from me, which is also in my opinion, the stuff that he did for Michael Jackson are the best sounding recordings ever made. They still sound fresh, they still sound great. They have amazing depth, and everything is really well thought. Anyway, that would be my first choice. Since we covered rock, I would say some a bit more contemporary producers like Max Martin. I think he's a genius. I mean, the stuff that not only as a producer but as a songwriter, I think the stuff that he was writing were all golden. So he knew how to produce them, and he was spot on every single time. And maybe I would say the Matrix. This that they produce stuff from. Rihanna, Christina Aguilera, all of them. Amazing production. So I would go for them since you stole Quincy Jones.
Okay. All right. So I guess we are at the end of it. If you want to know more about our mixing and mastering services, you can visit us on drmix.com. Get in touch with us today with the contact form. And remember to subscribe to this podcast and also visit our Facebook page /drmix.com, spell out. And hey, thanks for sticking around. See you next week.